Lenny, are we good? Oh, are we good to go?
Yeah, so let me just welcome everyone. I'm Lenny Siegel with Balanced Mountain View. The developers of the proposed Castro Commons project have been meeting with a number of people, primarily from the old Mountain View neighborhood, and doing other community outreach. And I thought it was time for other folks to see what they are planning to propose. My understanding is that they're still pretty flexible on a number of points. But this is the area on the northeast corner of Castro and El Camino, where Gateway Park is located. So is it Ken or Makana, who's going to be doing the presentation?
I'll just introduce myself really
Okay.
quickly on behalf of GPR, and then Ken will be running the show. I'll be helping with the presentation slides.
Great. And we're planning to go till 7 o'clock.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be on time. I just wanted to extend an extra thank you to everyone for allowing us to present to your group. We're really excited about what we have in the works. This has been a project that's been in the works for quite a while now, and we're doing our best to reach out to as many members of the community as we can. This is a work in progress. We've listened to everyone. We've been receiving input, adapting the project, and hopefully we'll be able to end up with an end result that everyone can be proud of and people will be excited to see at the gateway of downtown Mountain. So with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Ken, and then he'll run the show.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for allowing us to present. As many of you know, I'm a local Mountain View architect and have done quite a few buildings. And when GPR first asked me to come on board on this project, I was very impressed with the amount of outreach that they wanted to do prior to us putting together an application. So we have been spending the last, I'd say 4 months, really reaching out to many groups like yours and really listening and taking input and constantly continuing to update our proposal. At some point, we will have a project that we will submit and continue to do this kind of community outreach. So again, thank you so much for tonight. And let me just quickly go through the drawings to turn it over to all of you for questions. I find that's going to be more productive than me spending a lot of time with the drawing in the presentation. So let's just go through these slides if we could, Makana. Let's move on to the intro slide. As Lenny mentioned, this is the northeast corner of El Camino Real. Our project sites surround existing Gateway Park, which is an exciting opportunity for both us and the city and community in terms of us working together with all the parties I mentioned to enhance the existing Gateway Park, as well as incorporate an architectural design that wraps around it and supports it, especially with ground floor uses. So let's move to the next slide, which is kind of a circulation piece that we looked at early on with some input from community members that live in the immediate area. If Hope Street was to be sort of re-envisioned as a pedestrian, bicycle, an emergency vehicle connection versus a street for primarily autos as it is today, how would we do that? The council gave GPR very clear direction to retain existing Gateway Park, even though the precise plan calls for possibly relocating it. We like that idea of leaving Gateway Park, as I mentioned, this focal point on the corner and allowing this project to sort of develop behind it. They also gave GPR clear direction to consider abandoning Fairmont for autos and making it pedestrian and bicycle. So with that, we took a look at the circulation patterns and how that would all work, and engaged a transportation engineering firm just to look preliminary wise what would happen, how much traffic is on Hope today, what would happen if in fact it was rerouted. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. So let's move to the next slide if we could. That transportation study found that that Hope is actually a very low traffic volume range. As you can see from the first of those 810 cars, there is a lot of cut through traffic that occurs. And about half of that actually is cut through traffic, about 400. And they actually went out and did counts and observed the traffic patterns, and about 100 using view for cut through traffic. Their recommendation, their conclusion and early recommendation, of course, subject to a much broader study with the city, would be that if there was closure of Hope for autos, that cut through traffic would be added to Castro Street primarily, and to a much lesser amount to possibly View Street. So without the existing cut through traffic using Hope, the existing neighborhood would see relief from the current traffic levels of people cutting through their neighborhood. The streets are very narrow and in some cases some dangerous conditions. So let's go to the next slide if we could. So then we had a series of meetings about what would the community like to see here, and some of the stakeholders that participated in lots of this discussion wanted a very active street presence along Castro Street, outdoor dining opportunities, retail, and then possibly retail wrapping the back end of the Gateway Park, which we thought was a very interesting idea. And so having outdoor seating spaces, like some of the images, these are just sort of what we call a design imagery board of other spaces that we can pull different things from. Unique lighting, whether it's string lighting across the old Fairmont and Hope Street as it exists today to make it again more pedestrian oriented, bicycle oriented. The outdoor cafe look, some new open space that we're proposing back at the neighborhood with outdoor seating and very flexible kind of space, and really a gathering space so that we could activate the park, the existing Gateway Park, but also include some new exciting sort of open space that's actually larger than even the Gateway space is today. So let's go to the next slide if we could. These are a few views through what we're calling these paseos that were Fairmont and Hope, where it would be outdoor seating areas, very pedestrian and bicycle oriented. And then the architecture itself would form the edges of those pedestrian paseos, and you'll see a diagram of that in a minute, as well as these tall 25-foot spaces that you would walk through with retail on the ground floor. So here's one of you looking toward Castro Street from back at the corner of Fairmont and Hope. If you go to the next slide, this is an imagery of looking towards Gateway Park, which is kind of a new diagonal we would be proposing from our open space right to the park. So to activate that corner and have some commercial orientation on the ground floor as well. Let's go to the next slide, which is a view standing at Hope and Fairmont, again, looking back toward El Camino, where this would be the Paseo at Hope. And so you can see the same kind of activity areas. So once we get to the plan, I think these elements will be a little clearer. Let's go to the next slide if we could. We actually cut some building sections through those. This is one at the Fairmont Plaza. You can see the open space on the right and the proposed residential behind it. 2 levels of underground parking. So all of our parking would be located underground, and we would be parked to support the housing as well as visitor parking, and then also the retail parking that we would be proposing on the ground floor. So all parking would be located under the project, and then we would work with your group in particular, but members of the community, on what is the parking like along Castro Street. Maybe we go back to a parallel parking configuration like other parts of Castro Street to make it more bike friendly versus the angled parking that exists today. So let's go to the next slide. And these are some just quick massing studies. This does not have any architecture to it. Purposefully, we haven't even talked about the design of what the buildings could look like other than the massing of the buildings. You can see Gateway Park on the right-hand side of the site. This is a view on Castro Street. We would be proposing a 4-story building that would surround the park, similar to the height of what the precise plan calls for, as well as the existing office building that's at the northwest corner of Castro and El Camino. And then the project would step back and push its way back to a 5, 6, and 7-story component that would be cut at a diagonal across the site. So again, those higher, taller pieces would be pushed back and set back from the 4th floor, which would also have these very interesting gardens that roof gardens that we heard from the community. People would like to see a greening of some of these buildings and a softening of them, which we love that idea. So let's go to the next view, which is at the corner thank you, view from El Camino, looking back at the opposite side of the project. There you can see the 4-story project on the left-hand side, and then this diagonal piece that steps back in terms of the architecture massing from that. Let's go to the next slide, which is a really important one from the corner of Castro and El Camino, looking at Gateway Park. At the front, we've purposely stripped away all the existing landscaping, which would remain, by the way. We wouldn't be proposing to change Gateway Park's beautiful existing trees. We just wanted you to see how the massing works with the 4-story at the corner, and then the other floors up above that are pushed back at this diagonal. And we think that's kind of a sensitive move that some members of the community suggested, and we really liked it. So let's go to the next slide. We also put together a shadow study, which a few members of the community asked for, especially people who live in that area. So we did that. Let's move to the next slide. And then this shows the floor plans with the paseos, as I was talking about from the views. You can see Fairmont Avenue and how we would be proposing this Fairmont paseo from Hope Street to Castro Street. So that would be that pedestrian bicycle connection, all continuous there versus the autos. Then we also have that connection from Hope and Fairmont to El Camino. That would be the, again, pedestrian bicycle connection on the old Hope Street location. And then we have this diagonal that you would walk into from the neighborhood and would enter directly into the corner of existing Gateway Park. And here you can see some of the existing trees that exist on the park. And then we would work with members of the community and the city Parks and Rec Department to think about how to re-envision that park for a little bit more friendliness and openness and what this visual piece would look like, which could be very exciting. The blue pieces that are shown on this map are the retail components that stretch all along Castro. We also have a community room that we had heard members of the community ask for meetings that could be used. And that's in that sort of teal green area right off the diagonal paseo. And then we also have a building amenity element that looks right out on the park and be able to have fitness classes that sort of open out onto the park and could be a very, I think, exciting space. And then the orange terracotta pieces are residential components looking over a very large open space at the corner of Fairmont and Hope, which would be a new green space. So let's go to the next slide. If we could quickly, we can go right through these. We've developed each level plan so that people, if you have questions, we could come back to those. As I said, we have 2 full levels of underground parking that would exist under the project. Let's go to the next slide. And then here are kind of the project highlights for your review and comments. So without Hope street closure, we took a look at approximately you get about 120 units if you're consistent with the precise plan and look at a bonus density, which this project would be looking at. That would roughly translate to 15% below market rates, or 18, and about a little over 13,000 square feet of commercial. With the closure of Hope, we can increase the total amount of housing to 132 units, as well as additional below market rates units, as well as the market rate units there. Commercial would stay the same. And that is at a 7-story component. And at a 6-story component, the unit count would drop to 114. 97 of those would be market rate, and 17 would be below market rate units. And as I mentioned, we provided all on-site parking, 260 stalls for residential, 2 per unit. Commercial parking at 3 per 1,000, which is consistent with the precise plan, 40 stalls. And we have approximately 300 parking stalls. So those are the project highlights. I think we also—
And there's a question in chat from Serge Bont. Is there at-grade parking also on El Camino?
No, there would not be. We wanted to follow some of the guidelines for the El Camino specific plan. And but there would be along Castro Street. And again, discussion would be open whether that would be the existing diagonal that's there today, or would we re-envision it maybe possibly to a parallel parking stall configuration. You'd have less stalls, but again, more bicycle friendly. So let's go to the last couple of slides, and then I'd love to just open it up. So we also were asked, well, what does this thing really look like from a massing model? So you could see this massing model at GPR Ventures office right on Castro Street, right at the project site. Anytime you would like to come in, just let Makana know and he can show you this. But it gives you a little bit better visualization of what the paseos would be like, that they're 25 feet tall, 30 feet wide. They're really an inviting, exciting space that would have some privacy for the neighborhood at the back. Of course, with the addition of just bicycle and pedestrian only, they would be much more active, we think. And I'll just go through a few views of that. And then again, take a look at that physical model if you get a chance, because it really does sort of tell what the massing that we've been at least talking about, what it looks like. So with that, that is our presentation. And I wanted to close with just this slide. There was some suggestions about possibly creating a real gateway presence for Mountain View with possibly some type of entrance marker to the downtown. That was suggested by a number of people, but we heard this early on, and we really loved this idea of working again with the community and maybe some arts groups to develop something that welcomes you to downtown Mountain View and to Gateway Park. And this project sits right behind it with the existing trees and planting that are there at the park today. So just something we wanted to leave you with, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have tonight.
So if people could raise your hand if you have a question.
Makana, why don't we go back to the plan, because that probably might be some of the questions, you know, the ground level floor plan. There we go, right there, perfect.
Lenny, would you like to help moderate or?
Yeah,
should
yeah,
I?
I'll moderate. I don't see anybody's hand yet. So let me start by, since I've been in meetings with.
Yeah, Joan and Louise have their hands
Joan
up.
and Louise
Oh, they
have
do,
their
okay.
hands
Why don't you start, Joan?
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions. Number one, the parking. I don't know how to calculate whether or not parking is enough. Will it be scanty or are the 2 levels enough? I saw that you figured out there were 200 and some parking spots. Am I right?
Yeah, and this was a point that many of the local residents really were worried about. So we parked this at 2 parking stalls per unit. And then we also fully parked all of the commercial that's on the site as well, the retail restaurant site. So we believe that is consistent with the precise plan and what today's market is demanding. So it was a commitment by GPR not to have spillover parking, obviously, in the neighborhood.
Okay, I have to take your word for it because I have no clue what you really need.
Yeah, well, the city would study that as well in our application. So, I don't want to speak for them at all because, like I said, this is very preliminary. We have not had any application with the city at all on this.
Okay, second question.
Yes.
You have 2 4th-floor gardens. There are a couple of places in California, in San Francisco, where there are rooftop gardens where you can go and you take your lunch and eat in the sun during the day, if you're working downtown. And I'm wondering if you could think in terms of that.
Joan, can't hear you.
Can't hear
Try it
me?
again.
All right. Where did I cut out?
You're sorry about talk about San Francisco.
Okay, in San Francisco, there are some rooftop gardens where you can take your lunch, or if you're working downtown, you can take your lunch and eat there. And my question is if these 4-story 2 rooftop gardens couldn't be open in that way, if that wouldn't bring foot traffic and make the whole area more appealing. So I'm just throwing that out.
Great suggestion. We have not heard that yet. So thank you.
And then if you look at your plan, that little diagonal that goes from the Fairmont extension that goes through Castro, and then there's a little
Yes.
diagonal to go out. I wonder if you shouldn't just wait and see where people walk. I have a feeling that you'll put in a lovely pathway there, and people are going to go right there in the corner, at the very corner, and cross along and cut across what looks like lawn to me, just because people always find the shortest route. So I'll throw that out too. And finally, let's see. Oh yeah, I prefer the most dense, or the greatest number of residences. I like a 7th-story plan, and I really kind of hope you could make it 10 stories and add some more apartments. And that's the end of my comments.
Louise? Louise, you're muted. Louise, are you there?
Sorry, yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Can't push the buttons fast enough. Yes, so I have 2 sets of questions. First one is, you acknowledge the beauty of the existing trees, but at the same time, you also show that you're building a 2-story garage underground flush with the park. So I was wondering, first of all, if you have any studies for us to see as to the impact of digging a massive 2-story hole next to trees that have probably been there for well over 100 years and have are basically next to small buildings built in the 50s and 60s, and how you might impact the roots, the health of the trees, and possibly destroy them. The second question that I have is, you show that you talk about activities, commercial activities within the Hope Street Tunnel area, but your plans show that there is no retail or anything there. So what kind of activities would you consider to be in a 180-foot tunnel that people would be using? Because it just doesn't seem like that's actually enunciated.
Well, first off, let me answer the first one. Again, this is a preliminary drawing, and we would definitely be retaining an arborist to review the existing tree structure, landscape architectural firm, and some other professionals to make sure that this project did not impact those existing trees. That's a stated design goal. It continues to be that. And if the parking garage has to move back from what we're showing on a preliminary basis, it will move back. That's number one. So those trees will be protected. The second part of your question, I just take exception with the word tunnel. I don't see it that way. I've said that to you previously. I think that these are amazing spaces. You look at the model, you can really see that. And we have not fully programmed what would go on in that space on Hope, but we do see it being 30 feet wide, 25 feet high, as an incredible opportunity to take advantage of that. I don't know what that is just yet on some of these preliminary plans, but we may in fact have more commercial that we wrap there. Ownership has committed to get some high quality restaurant in this project, as well as other retail commercial uses. And we want to continue to explore that. The community room may move from where it is today. That may become more retail and may move down onto El Camino at the Hope Street Paseo. So again, it's early on. We don't have a complete marketing study of what we're going to do there, but we want to activate all of those paseos. So thank you for your question.
May I add something? This is Phil Roll of GPR. Firstly, we appreciate Lenny and his group taking the time to learn more about the project. With respect to the tree roots, we can develop, this is a development will be very sensitive, as Ken said, with an arborist to make sure we don't impact those trees. It's done all the time. This is not new. This is not new. This will not be a new process. This is done all the time, and we will deal with it appropriately to make sure we ensure that the city gets what they want and the community gets what they want. As it relates to tunnels, Louise, we've shown you architecture. We brought it up time and time again, and you keep bringing up these tunnels, and we just don't understand why this keeps being brought up, because it's been articulated, shown, displayed, and that's all I have to add.
Well, I would just say that the definition that Mr. Webster gives us is a covered walkway, a pass through between other obstacles is technically a tunnel. So obviously, and the use of a paseo has its own use, that a paseo is also a walkway, but it's a walkway that's designed for social interaction, socializing. So that's why I use the term tunnel for the Hope Street side, because at this point there is no retail, there is no, its purpose is not for social gathering, as you yourself have said. It's for people to get through from one point to the next. So again, I'm sorry if you find it offensive, but I'm just sticking with what Webster says.
So moving on to Pam.
Yes, hi. Thank you to the developers for meeting with our group. I know this is going to be a long process. In any case, I do want to commend you on the community room concept. When I was on the planning commission, this is one thing I would often ask developers: why can't we have a community room that is not just open to the residents or the owners, but also could be used for the whole community? So you can have book clubs or Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever. So I hope that will continue to remain in the plan. Also, isn't clear whether these are going to be for rent or for sale. Has that been determined?
We can't answer how the market will bear, but what we can say is they're going to be mapped for sale condominiums or BMR units. That's the way they're going to be mapped, partial map. So, but we can't, we would hope to sell it, but we can't say that 20 of our investors will want to buy units and then rent them out. But the intent is to develop these as for sale.
I would really encourage you to consider doing that. We do have some aging people like myself and my husband who someday would love to live downtown. And we have houses that have great value, and it would be fun to be downtown. If you look at downtown Palo Alto and downtown Menlo Park, they have 8 12-story residential towers. And I've done some design work on some of those units, and they're really nice. And I would really like to see Mountain View downtown have that same opportunity for people to live in a nice, larger, upscale downtown unit. So
Pam, thank you for bringing that up. And that is really our goal. Our goal is we're a local developer. Both Glenn and I have been in the community for many, many years. Our family's 3rd generation. We've been in business since 1935. Glenn has been developing in this area since the mid 90s or the early 90s. Our goal is to have our headquarter office in Mountain View and to share space with the community, allow people to have meeting rooms. We can have conversations. And even though Luis thinks we have tunnels and we're not going to open it up to community gatherings on the Hope Street side, that doesn't mean that street vendors, coffee kiosks can't be offered there, and have seating, outdoor seating, have paseos similar to what they do in Paris. So that's our goal. We would love to have people. We like to meet a gathering place and create a sense of community on this side of Castro. So thank you for adding that. I appreciate your thoughts.
And one more question too. As far as the history, I'm also the president of the Mountain View Historical Association, and I vaguely remember seeing an old photograph from on Castro Street that did have an archway, a metal archway similar to what you show that said Mountain View. So if you would like to consult with the Mountain View Historical Association, we would be glad to provide some input, as well as input on potential architectural design.
We really appreciate those thoughts and give Lenny some credit. Lenny early on and I don't know if you worked with Lenny, he provided us that photo with the archway. And so we took it upon ourselves, Ken took it upon himself to incorporate that in our design to show you that we want to honor that old fill with the new fill and have a gateway into downtown. So
I thought it looked familiar.
Yeah.
Good for your homework there.
Yeah.
No, it's not mine. Give Lenny the props with your help. Thank you for adding that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Paula, it's your turn.
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Hala Al-Shawani, and I live in Cuesta Park area, but I walk to downtown almost daily. I have family that lives on Cypress Point Drive, so I'm constantly passing by this place. I just wanted to, a couple of things. I wanted to thank the developer for listening to the community and to the city staff and preserving the Gateway Park. And it sounds like you might even be enhancing it, which is great. And I was glad to hear that you're committed to preserve the trees to make sure that the underground parking is not going to impact them one way or the other. That's really great to hear. I thank you for that. You went over the shadow study very, very quickly. It was really hard to see. And I do have a great concern for having in some part of the project, 7-story building, adjacent to a single-story homes. That's definitely going to impact these homes one way or the other. Maybe I can give my comments and then you can go back and give us a look at that shadow plan and how it's justified not to impact the surrounding neighborhood residents.
Sure.
That's one thing. And if you can also comment on how you are justifying the 7-story building, because my understanding is that the precise plan for downtown allows 4-story buildings, but if you add a bonus density, then that would be 6-story buildings. And I think the exception was a 7-story building if it was an exceptional hotel type of building. So that doesn't fit in any of those guidelines for the precise plan for downtown. So I'd like to know how the 7 stories were, put into this design. And then lastly, on Hope, maybe 3 points. Then the last one on Hope Street. It's really scary when big developers start taking over public streets. And we want to make sure that if that happens, we absolutely must have, a privately owned public access where it's really truly usable by the public, not just, draw a nice picture and then it ends up being a dead zone that no one wants to walk by or use or go through. That would be really hard to accept. So either solidify your design for Hope Street, so it truly is a POPA with all the appropriate greenery and activity kind of design and retail on the bottom and all that, so that it's clear for us if we were to support it, it's clear for us that we can. At this point, I can. There's not enough details on Hope Street for me to say, yeah, this is going to be usable and a benefit to the community. So that needs a little.
So those are all really good points. And let me just take a couple of them, and then Phil, you could jump in on adding too. What you're saying, the last point, we are starting to hear. And we just heard Louise say the same thing too. We need to activate that side of that paseo. We agree with that. And these were some early sketches that you see here. And so we're taking that really under consideration. They need to be active. They need to have outdoor seating. They need to have spaces that people really want to come and walk by and sit and have a coffee or other retail components. So thank you. We want the same thing that you're looking for and in all 3 of these paseo pieces. So that's number 1. 2, we'll come back to the shadow study that you mentioned, and I'll go to that in a second. But I think I just wanted to make sure that you and others here knew that we're taking a lot of this input, and we still need to continue this design drawings. Like I said, this is in the early stages. So what you're saying about activating these streets are a must for us. They just are.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think, Ken, I can't really comment on the shadow study. We did it. Maybe you can get into more detail. Yep. But I appreciate the comments as it relates to the Hope Street side. We kind of consider it a POPA. We want it to be, they've talked about closing the grid, but certainly that's not the intent. We want to leave it, we want to leave access for emergency vehicles. We want to leave access for for pedestrian and bikes. And certainly, to Louise's point and others, it behooves us to have some activity for retail on that part of it. Maybe it's a couple thousand feet, but we want that site activated. And to your point about a POPA, that's been in consideration. The point we're trying to make on all this, we just want to have a dialogue. We want to hear from the community. We want to address the community's concerns. We want to meet the community halfway. And that's what our intent is. And that's what we've tried to do. We tried to do that with the park when our original proposal was to build to the corner based on the precise plan. The community did not like that plan. We adjusted, we immediately did an audible, we redesigned it, and we've worked with the community. These are all conceptual. Nothing's been submitted. These plans have not been submitted to the city. This is conceptual. We want to hear from the folks within the community to do the best design for all of us, so everybody wins. That's the intent.
Yeah, and so this shadow study does show the potential of a 7-story versus 6. And you are correct about your comments on what the precise plan allows 4 and possibly up to 6 with a bonus density. The 7th in the precise plan is discussed as a hotel. This is not a hotel. It is a mixed use project, retail ground floor, housing up above. The reason for the 7th floor is we are offering a tremendous amount of community benefits. And to do that, my client, GPR, needs to achieve certain types of density in terms of its unit count. And this 7th floor would allow us to do that. So again, it's purely a suggestion at this particular time. And that's why we wanted this shadow study to be based on a 7th-floor building, so you could see it. You can see the upper left-hand corner piece, which is summer solstice at 9 a.m. Then off to number 2, which is at noon, and you can see summer at 3 p.m. So that's those are accurate shade and shadow studies based upon the sketches that you've seen. The winter, of course, where the sun is lower, shadows get cast further. You can see the one there at 9 a.m., which is casting across Castro Street and onto the site. That's the 4-story office building. So you can see the corner itself at Castro and El Camino, where the plaza is, typically would still be in sunshine, even at the worst condition, which would be that winter solstice condition. Then the back noon condition, you can see the shadow study casting out to sort of the edge of Fairmont and on to Castro Street. And then always the worst case scenario is dead winter solstice at 3 p.m. You can see that shadow study. And very consistent with some of the other mid-rise buildings in downtown, where they're casting similar shadows on both east and west frontages. So take your time to look at this. It's an accurate read, and it wanted to be that.
I'm looking at it, just I'm noting that number 6, the winter solstice at 3 p.m. It looks like the shadow really covers almost half the block across from the corner onto Hope, and I can't read, Fairmont, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it looks like that will be a significant impact on all the, the single homes that are all there, that they will have to put up with.
Well, this doesn't take into consideration either the trees that are existing there too, which do cast a similar shadow because they're tall, liquid amber right now. So anyway, you're right. And so again, we've got drawings to show everybody in case that question does come up. So hopefully we answered each one of your points that you had.
Let's move on. Mike, you have your hand up.
Yep. Yeah. Hey, Phil, Mike Kasperzak. Just a quick question. A lot of developers have developed property in Mountain View, Merlone Geyer being, sort of the most frequent, with all these promises for great ground floor retail. And then the retail never gets filled. Whether they're charging retail rates or still trying to charge office rates or what, I don't know. But what kind of commitments is GPR willing to make to ensure that we don't have a lot more see-throughs on the ground floor, but there's actually quality retail or restaurants in there?
Well, I mean, I can't tell you based on an economy in 3 years who will lease or not lease, but the intent is we feel that if it's responsibly designed, which Ken will do a great job doing, and it's and it has a lot of activity where you're going to get vehicular and pedestrian access. I think retailers will want to be in those spaces, and what we're looking for in those spaces are restaurants and places where people can meet, the community can meet. In addition to that, we have a tenant right now that occupies space within our Castro project as it stands now, and they're a dentist and a dermatologist, and we have a commitment to them that we will honor their occupancy, and they'll be a tenant in the future. So our goal, and we've already talked to certain restaurants, local restaurants, not national, we want to create energy on this part of Castro and El Camino. I mean, you come down there various times of the day, and the atmosphere is completely different than what you get on the Castro side closer to the train station, where they've closed the streets off. They've actually closed. So we want to create that energy on our side of Castro and El Camino.
Yeah, and Mike, this Ken, thank you for the question. It's a good one. I'm concerned about that too. You know, we do a lot of retail work, and I want to make sure that the amount of activity here really is appropriate and least. Just same concern you have. And I'll tell you why I'm confident that we have a good opportunity here. One, we have this large community room that we talked about that I think is a great community benefit. Two, GPR will have their office there. That's not a large office, but it is an active space, and we know it in terms of size. As Phil mentioned, there is the dentist dermatology person, which our group that's already on site, which is great. We've also put the project's amenity area, which would be fitness and sort of office leasing spaces on the ground floor. So I really think, you know, when this comes down to it, we're talking probably about 2 spaces that would be left for probably food service kind of uses, restaurant uses that Phil and Glenn have been very specific that they're not going to be looking at national tenants. They're going to be looking at more mom and pop uses that I think will do well here and have a really good opportunity with these paseos to activate them. The other option is we don't think that retail would survive or do well east of Hope Street on El Camino. We just don't see that. So I think we're going to concentrate our effort around the Gateway Park and down Castro and a little bit down what would be this Hope Paseo. And I think we can get that to work in today's market. But as we all know, retail is ever changing. It has, in particular, the last 5 years.
I'm going to move on to Serge. Your hand's up.
Why do you keep skipping me?
Oh,
You didn't raise your hand.
Oh,
Alex.
your
I don't
hand
see your
is
hand.
Follow the wall, Alex.
You want to go? I'll
Go
go after you.
Go ahead, Alex. That your hand
No,
is
I want to hear Serge first.
All right. So I had asked a question about the at-grade parking, and if you look at the map that you have here,
Yes.
it looks like there are some parking slots facing El Camino.
Yeah, there would be 4 to 6 parking stalls. We're thinking that
this doesn't seem to fit with, you know, the El Camino precise plan, which is to avoid that type of thing, because we have too many of us already. So I mean, it's my observation. So
yeah, and it's a good one. I think we need to be able to have FedEx, UPS drop off. We also need to be able to not tie up Castro Street with sort of retail deliveries. And so we're thinking that through. As you can see, the gray area to the right, Makana, if you want to point to the driveway down into the underground parking would be right there. The other one would be up at Castro Street there. So those would be just driveways that would be going down. And then that additional parking that we're showing down on El Camino there would again be UPS, mail service. So that it would be short-term sort of turnover parking. But
except that, I mean, it's going to be, I mean, maybe used short-term, but, you know, it's going to be visible, 24/7. So, I don't think it fits, any plans that the city had. And then I had another comment on the parking. You did mention the street parking around Castro.
Yes.
So personally, I would get rid of it, but if you can't, make it parallel parking, because that angle parking is a disaster for biking. So
Yes, yeah, we agree with that. And, we'd like to have further discussions about that, because I think a few parallel parking stalls there would also help activate that retail. So I think we're open to ideas there. We certainly want to engage the city and their thoughts of what that is their space, not ours. So I think we need to still get input from them as we start to develop an application prior to us submitting. So thank you.
Okay, Alex, your turn.
Okay. Ken, good to see you again. Thanks
Yes.
for having me.
Hi, Alex.
Okay, so you got below grade parking, right?
Yes.
On two sides. Can we have tunnels? Like, can we connect them with tunnels? Can we start like a network of tunnels?
So you always come up with great comments. We do have an underground parking. It is fully connected already via all the circulation paths, but we have not thought about underground tunnels. We've thought about at-grade paseos / as Luis said, tunnels, Webster's dictionary, but I don't view them as that. Yeah. What else?
Okay, I'll just
Anything
assume
else,
you're keeping the tunnels secret. I'm with Joan. I would go taller. I think 10 stories would be fine. I think that along El Camino and downtown is a place for density, for having more housing. Like, yes. And I've made this comment in other meetings. Building is an intensive process, and the more you can do it once, like the greater the ROI, like economically, but also in terms of materials and energy investment and land use. It's really hard to redevelop. So when you're doing it, you should do the most that you can, the best that you can do. And every time you cut a corner and like, cut back on it, then you are costing the next generation housing and utility. Can I get a bike shop back?
Yeah, that's a possibility too. I know GPR has definitely said that, and I think it's a great idea too. So I'd like to push the envelope on this retail a little bit, because I think it's moving in the right direction, and there's a lot of energy from community members like yourself, this group, which will help help with these mom and pop type uses versus the nationals.
Yeah, and then the final thing is just at University of Arizona, they have a bunch of paseos, breezeways. It is a great way to protect from the sun, and it is a nice place to hang out. It is a really pleasant experience when you have like shielding from noise, traffic, the sun, especially if they are well designed and have good benches and places to chill. It's super. This looks like something that you could take inspiration from campuses that have community rooms, dorms with various public spaces, like small shops that cater to the community that lives in that area. And it looks like you're already going in the same direction as a lot of the university campuses I've seen, like the tighter ones. So I think it'll be a nice place to live.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your comments as always.
I think there are a few minutes for me to finally say what I think about the project. I love the concept. Medium density housing with ground floor pedestrian activity, space for bikes to go through. I see it I'd like them to change the name to Castro Gateway, because I see it as a gateway to downtown. And in that way, it's, to me, the kind of project that we want to see. The challenge is there are 3 zones. There's part that's R3 across to the east of Hope Street. There's a little bit of the El Camino Precise Plan, and there's the obsolete downtown Precise Plan. And that downtown Precise Plan, should have been revised. And the council, because of the recusal of council members, never got around to even looking at that. So this is what I'd like to see on this corner. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned is they're talking about removing 12 naturally affordable rent-controlled apartments. I've told them that I would be asking the city council as part of the negotiation over the street sale, the closure of the streets, to up the number of below market units that are included in the project. That to me would make it more desirable. But basically, again, I see this as the kind of project we need. Perhaps the first issue that will come before the city is whether or not the city is willing to sell Hope Street. The city has sold streets as part of developments in the past. I'm waiting to hear for objections from the neighborhood, maybe people on View Street. But basically, well, as people may know, I like closing off the 3 blocks of Castro to motor vehicles. And I like the idea of doing this here, but I want to hear the neighborhood's response. But I think the developers are going to be looking for support as the city to get the city to even consider selling the 1 block of Hope Street to them as part of their development. And just on the history of this, as many of you know, that the Gateway Park is one of Mountain View's preeminent free speech areas. So I argued against removing it. I opposed it when I was on council and when we looked at hotel projects on the corner. And so I'm not only pleased to see that they want to save and enhance Gateway Park for that reason, but once we saw that, that really helps deal with the massing. Some of the early drawings I saw with tall buildings on the corner, by keeping the park, the project is less overwhelming and to some degree mirrors the plaza on the other side of Castro Street as an inviting area, again, as a gateway to downtown. And the person who's really pushed for the sign is Roberto. And he's the one that called it to my attention. So this to me is a project that I hope we can all support and help them navigate through the difficulty of having 3 zones and including an obsolete precise plan. Are there any final comments from anybody? Okay, we'll make this recording available and maybe invite discussion on the Balanced Mountain View list. And I want to thank the developers for taking the time to present to us tonight. I think it's been really helpful. And I want to thank them for, over a period of time, responding to requests for information for putting together the model to help the neighborhood understand what's going on. So again, thank everybody for joining us. And again, we will be advertising the availability of the recording, assuming Greg figured out how to do it right.
It's a big if.
So thank you,
I believe in you, Greg.
Anna and Phil.
Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate all of your comments. We really do.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.